Thanks for jumping on, guys and gals. We're going to go ahead and get started. I am excited today to talk about fasting. I know that it's something I'm passionate about. I've shared some information about intermittent fasting before. However, I'm leaving it to the expert to tell us all about intermittent fasting, and that expert is Autumn Bates. She is a nutritionist. I'll let her talk about her credentials and give her own introduction. But as far as I'm concerned, I met Autumn a few years back. She actually was living in the South Bay at the time, so she was working very closely with us over at Strand Hill Properties. And so Autumn's been fantastic for us as a great resource in nutrition. And so she's going to talk to us about intermittent fasting today. So thank you, Autumn. I will hand it over to you and let you share all of this lovely information with our team.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, let me see if the millennial in me can figure out how to share my screen first. Okay, there. All right.
Awesome. I'll let you guys go.
So while that's going, Chelsea's going to try and bring that up if she can. So my name's Autumn, and I'm a certified clinical nutritionist with my master's in nutrition, human performance. I have a YouTube channel where I share a lot of information on nutrition. So that little line of me giving my credentials is something I've said legitimately over 400 times now because I have over 400 videos. So with intermittent fasting, I have a funny little slide coming up on what people think intermittent fasting usually is and what it isn't. So what I found with intermittent fasting is that a lot of us, at least just with the wellness community, I've seen this happen a lot where we think of like we need to be doing all of these crazy things to be doing it right. So once we have the slide up, you'll see, but there's like the sauna and doing like exercising so much every day and eating perfectly beautiful green salads on a consistent basis. Like all of those things are great. And if we could be doing all those things more consistently, that'd be fantastic. But unfortunately, it's just, we are also all real people, myself included. And so what I found with intermittent fasting is adjusting it to fit real people's life is so important. Otherwise, you won't ever reap any of the benefits of it because you won't be able to do it, or at least long term. I mean, I know that I wasn't able to do all these components that were deemed necessary, at least on a consistent basis. And so I was able to find a way to make it so that this fits real people's lives. And I have, like I mentioned, with my certifications, I have my undergrad was in nutrition, and my master's is in nutrition human performance. I'm a certified clinical nutritionist. I'm also a certified personal trainer. So I like to take all of these components and smush them into how we can actually use all this as real people too. So with that in mind, I also have the complete intermittent fasting bundle, which is my intermittent fasting program that legitimately thousands of men and women around the world are using right now. And the reason why it works is because it's for real people. So the basics of intermittent fasting, which again, once we have the slide up, it'll be easier to walk through all this and see all of it. But the basics of intermittent fasting, it can sound either excessively complex or we can view it as a little too simple. So with the basic concept of intermittent fasting, you're basically just eating during a certain time of day and not eating during others. The basic concept is that simple, but then where we start to see results come into the nitty-gritty of the actual eating window and how long you're fasting. So there's like two main types of fasting. There's alternate day fasting, which is what some people often think of when they think of intermittent fasting. That component is where you're eating. Oh, perfect. Okay. So then next slide, and then one more slide. So that was the picture I was talking about of all of the things that people usually think it is. Perfect meal prep, sauna, doing certain supplements, exercising, like red light therapy, all that's great, but it's 100% not necessary. So going on to the next slide, I believe is where or the next one. So those are just some of my AM peeps who have used my intermittent fasting programs. But intermittent fasting 101, so ADF is alternate day fasting, which just means that on non-fasting days, you're eating, quote, normally. So where you can eat all throughout the day. And then on fasting days, you're legitimately not eating anything, or there's other alternatives where you're eating 500 calories or less. I'm not a big fan of alternate day fasting. I found it doesn't work very well long-term because it doesn't fit real people's lives. We like to be eating on a daily basis. We like to be enjoying meals with people. So what I find works better is the time restricted approach. So you'll see next to the time restricted approach, there's 14-10, 12-12, 16-8, 24, etc. So all that means is it's telling you how long you're fasting and how long your eating window is. So like, let's say the 14-10, that's a pretty common one that a lot of my female clients will use. So 14 hours is how long you'd be fasting, and then 10 hours is how long your eating window would be. And really keep that eating window in mind, because the eating window is what's often forgotten about, and that's where a lot of mistakes can come into play. So with determining how long your fast will be, longer isn't always better. We're going to get into that in a bit as well. So you'll see like the 20-hour fast, you'll see a lot of people talking about it. I found that not a lot of people do well with that one. We'll get to that more in a bit. So just know that as long as you're incorporating one of these fasting periods, even if it's just the 12-12, you're actually going to be getting a lot of great benefits. So what those benefits that are actually studied are improved insulin resistance. So insulin is our storing hormone, especially if you have a weight loss goal in mind. You really want to be keeping insulin in check and not having it spike up very high. So what intermittent fasting does, it decreases the frequency of how often your body is producing insulin. So by doing that, your body is allowed to naturally tap into fat burning, which is why the intermittent fasting approach has actually been found to increase fat burning over other traditional weight loss approaches of just simply restricting calories, because of that hormonal response. So you'll see the second benefit there is increased fat burning. The cellular cleanup, this is probably what a lot of people know it with outside of just the weight loss approach, and that's called autophagy. So this is where people see the energy boosting benefits, because you're getting rid of those bad non-performing cells and your body's allowed to create new ones. So that's what can happen with the fasting period. And then this last one is one that not a lot of people talk about, but it's, in my opinion, one of the most drastic ones that most people experience right away, and that's the decreased bloating. So there's a process in your body, it's called the migrating motor complex, or MMC. It's basically like the gut cleaning crew for your GI tract. So intermittent fasting, because of that gut rest process, naturally turns on the migrating motor complex, which flushes out left behind food and bacteria that would typically ferment food and cause bloating. So this is where within 24 hours or 48 hours of using an intermittent fasting approach, most people notice a significant reduction in bloating. So you can go to the next one. Those are just some of the main benefits that have been studied, but a lot of other ones, like just the increased energy is one that a lot of people will talk about. Improved sleep, which whole hormonal sideline, but it can help because of that improved cellular response. So a lot of downstream benefits to intermittent fasting as well. Okay, so for picking your window, remember, longer is not always better. So this is probably one of the biggest pieces of advice I could give you for intermittent fasting is don't just think that you have to be fasting for 20 hours a day or 22 hours a day or even 18 hours a day. For most people, not only is that not necessary, but it could not be beneficial. So it really needs to fit your lifestyle, and factors to consider. First of all, are you an athlete or do you exercise a lot? I know a lot of people, especially in the South Bay, like to train for marathons or triathlons. In these circumstances, you actually want a shorter fast because you need to be able to fit enough protein and nutrients within your eating window. And having a longer fast really condenses the amount of time that you're able to get in the amount of food that you need for recovery. So with athletes, shorter fasts are better. Same thing if you're used to a high carb or high processed food diet, that's something you'll also want shorter fasts, at least in the beginning while you're adjusting your meals, because the higher carbohydrate diet has more of those spikes and falls in your blood glucose levels, which leads to more hunger and more consistent hunger. So having a longer fast wouldn't really be possible at that time. You want to make sure you first address your food and have a shorter fast while you do that. Go back. There's two more. So busy schedule is one, actually probably for a lot of you guys as well. This was actually really a good strategy to have a longer fast if you do have a very busy schedule, because taking the time to sit down and eat or get lunch or figure out where you're going to be eating or making multiple meals, if you have a really busy schedule, this can actually not work for your lifestyle. So having a longer fast and strategically making your meals very satiating and bigger when you do have those meals, that actually is better for a lot of my clients who do have a busy work schedule, who own their own companies. So that's definitely one option if you have a busier schedule. And then the other is hungry often. So this consideration of being hungry frequently has multiple reasons why people tend to feel hungry frequently. One being that they aren't eating enough satiating foods, the other being poor blood glucose control, which a lot more people have that than realize it. And that's where having a shorter fast is really important, because you want to address your food first, which is a concept we'll get into in a bit, but this is just important to realize that there's a lot of factors that's important to factor in when choosing your window length, because you don't want to just have a one size fits all approach. None of us are one size fits all. So we need to make sure that even your fasting period and how long that fasting period and when that fasting period is fits your lifestyle. And that's going to be key for making it fit your real life long term. Okay, next please. Okay, so this is a really key fact. If you get one thing out of this, it's this. So intermittent fasting is not eating less, it's eating less often. The benefits of intermittent fasting don't come out of just eating less. It comes out of how frequently you're eating and how your frequency of meals become less frequent. So remember I talked about the storing hormone insulin. A lot of negative health effects happen when our insulin levels stay really high throughout the day. So what intermittent fasting does is it reduces the number of times that you're going to be secreting the storing hormone insulin, because it's only secreted when we are eating. So with this intermittent fasting, you're actually getting a lot of the main benefits are from not eating as frequently and allowing insulin to naturally dip back down. The other main difference is the migrating motor complex stimulation. Remember, that's where you're going to be flushing out left behind food and bacteria. So this has nothing to do with how much food you're eating, but the frequency. And because of that reduced insulin that we're secreting, we're not secreting as much insulin when we're fasting. It also allows lipolysis, or that fat burning process, to stay on. So none of this has to do with eating less, all of it with the frequency in which you're eating. And in fact, the calorie restrictive protocol is known as semi-starvation. If you look up in various studies, it's called a state of semi-starvation. Fasting is not a state of starvation. You can pair calorie restriction with intermittent fasting, which I don't advise. You're going to get all of the negative effects of semi-starvation if you do that. But intermittent fasting itself is not a state of semi-starvation. Okay, next please. Okay, so this is the number two. So that first one was number one most important. This is the number two. It kind of goes hand in hand though within that one topic I was talking about. So don't ignore your eating window. I'm going to repeat that one more time. Don't ignore your eating window. The really big common misconception with intermittent fasting is that you can eat whatever you want as long as it's during your eating window and you're not eating during that fasting period. You might see some short-term benefits with this if you use this approach, because essentially you're just using intermittent fasting to cut out a meal and you're going to get that state of semi-starvation and lose weight in the beginning. But ultimately that's just going to make it so your BMR, or your metabolism, starts to decrease. And then you start to gain back weight a lot easier. Your energy levels are going to be extremely low. You're going to lose muscle. So you don't want to do that. Instead, what we want to do with fasting is during that eating period, we want to try and mimic the benefits of intermittent fasting as much as possible with our meals. So remember, the main benefit with intermittent fasting, of course, the frequency, but also the fact that insulin levels stay lower. So what we want to do, especially if weight loss or stable energy levels is your goal, or body recomposition, so decreasing body fat but increasing muscle mass, what we want to do is focus on the types of foods that don't cause insulin to really spike. That way you're going to be getting those same benefits, or very similar benefits from the fasting period with your meals itself. So the main things we want to focus on during that eating window: protein, fat, fiber. If you've ever watched any of my YouTube videos, you probably heard me say that 1,000 times. But protein is the number one most important factor. Especially for women, I found that we tend to not eat as much and we tend to think that we're getting enough, but vast majority of my clients, that's the first area that we first address, is the protein component. So protein causes the body to secrete the satiety, or the sensation of fullness, that hormone that's associated with that, called peptide YY, or PYY. So we want complete whole sources of protein at each meal, whether you're having 2 or 3 meals during that eating window, but just making sure that you're getting enough for your needs, which there are calculations on how you can figure that out. But we want to centralize our meals first around the protein component. So you can actually see I have some pictures of different meals on here. These are all from my intermittent fasting programs, but the obvious proteins with the meatballs and with the salmon, I believe that is, I can't see, the things are blocking. Oh, there it is. Yeah, with the salmon there. But then also even with things like having smoothies, or, there's other ways that protein isn't going to be as obvious. And that's where using protein sources like Greek yogurt, eggs, chicken, fish, beef, tempeh, turkey, a lot of options. We just want to make sure that you're getting a main dense source of protein at each of your meals. This helps to stabilize the blood glucose levels, helps to make sure that you're not going to get those dips in energy, helps to make sure that you're going to get the satiety and you're not going to be hungry during that fasting period when you do go into your fast. It also is really important for making new hormones, really important for making new muscle, especially if you are exercising, but even if you aren't. So a lot of reasons why you need to be getting enough protein, but the main one that's going to affect your day-to-day life is hunger. If you don't have enough protein, you're going to get hungry and you're going to get sugar cravings. So it's crucial that you are getting enough protein and having each of your meals have a high quality source of protein. So the next most important is fat. Fat is, just like with protein, it is going to also make you feel more satiated. So it causes the body to secrete the satiety hormone cholecystokinin, or CCK. So peptide YY and cholecystokinin work together to make you feel satiated for about 3 to 4 hours. So a good way to determine if you've gotten enough either protein or fat at your meal is if you feel satisfied for at least 3 hours. If you don't, then you didn't get either enough protein or either enough fat. So it's just a good little tip to help determine how much you need or what you need to be increasing. So obviously with the fats, some of the main great options: avocados, olives, nuts, seeds, cheese, something people often think of as something evil, but it's actually a really great source of both protein and fat as long as you're getting a high quality cheese. Full fat yogurts, so especially Greek yogurts, like I mentioned earlier, but full fat, not low fat, not zero fat. We want to be getting full fat. Whole side tangent on dairy, on why as long as you aren't lactose intolerant and as long as you don't have any allergies, how it's really great to be incorporating that. But one that's extra important to consider with full fat dairy products, if you are going to have dairy, is that within that fat component, you have an essential nutrient called vitamin K2. If you have a history of heart disease or osteoporosis in your family, then you really want to be making sure you're getting enough vitamin K2, because that actually helps to take the calcium out of the arteries from causing that calcification and causing any issues with heart disease, and put it into your bones. So it makes your heart health healthier, but then it also helps to make sure that your bones are strong and healthy too. So it's kind of like a win-win there. And that's specifically what you're going to find in the full fat yogurts. You will not find it in the low or zero fat, because the vitamin K2 is a fat soluble vitamin. So that was a little side tangent. It has nothing to do with intermittent fasting, but just since we're talking about those fats, really important you're using full fat dairy products if you are going to use dairy. And then nut butters, coconut flakes, all of those are great. Depending on your hunger level and how active you are, anywhere between 2 to 4 servings is what I recommend with a fat source at each of the meals. And then the last component of the meals is going to be fiber. Fiber is probably the one that most people will think of as something that they need to be getting, so like vegetables. But this helps to act on the stretch mechanism within your stomach and tell your brain you're full and satisfied. So notice each of these 3 components act separately on our satiety and feeling full and satisfied. We always want to make sure our goal with eating is to feel full and satisfied, not to snack. Then you're countering those benefits of intermittent fasting. We always want to be making sure we're eating till full and satisfied and feeling good for about 3 to 4 hours. Oh, sorry, will you go back one more time? I just want to talk through, yeah. Okay, so some really great fiber sources. Obviously, you probably know leafy greens. I didn't even put in vegetables, traditional vegetables in here for that reason, because those are fairly obvious. But avocado, this is what I call a fiber fat. So it's a great source of fat, but it's also a great source of fiber. So you get like a twofer there. Artichoke hearts, raspberries, same thing with chia seeds and flax seeds. These are kind of like fiber fats. So a great source of anti-inflammatory omega-3 fats, and it's a great source of fiber. So those are all great fiber options. Okay, now you can go to the next one. Which are all the recipe components within my programs that I mentioned. Each of those are included within the recipes for that exact reason. Okay, you can go to the next one. Okay, now we get into the realistic intermittent fasting approach. So the number one thing I always recommend is always address your meals first. So if you have the ability to, before you even start intermittent fasting, I always recommend first making sure you tackle your meals, making sure that you're using the protein, fat, and fiber approach, making sure that you're reducing your sugar intake and the processed refined carbohydrates, because that'll really increase hunger and make intermittent fasting hard. So I don't think I put that on. Yeah, I didn't put that on here. Oh, no, I did. But first things first, focus on your meals. Use that for about 3 to 7 days so you can just make sure that you're focused on satiety. That way it makes transitioning to an intermittent fasting period so much more simple, and just so you're not going to be a hangry cookie monster during the first few days of using intermittent fasting. So once you do start with that, starting with a shorter fast is going to be ideal. So I usually recommend starting with a 12-hour fast. That's like the minimum what you need to be doing to be getting those benefits, which really is not that crazy. Let's say you would normally eat breakfast anyway at 8 a.m. That means you're done eating at 8 p.m. and then you're fasting for 12 hours. So it's really just cutting out any of that snacky or any alcohol after that time. So it's just really making sure you're not snacking after dinner is a key thing you're doing with these shorter fasts. But then you can always start to, I think I had this in a later one, so we'll be going over this again in a second, but then you can always start to extend your fasting period after you first get that 12 hours down, after you first address your meals. This is also why I talk so much about that with having that I have a 7-day intermittent fasting detox before the programs, for that exact reason of addressing the meals first. So I don't know how social everyone is. I'm not super social, but I always put this in here because I know that a lot of people like to, especially now that the restaurants are open back up again, you can go out to eat. You might have later eating windows on those days that you do go out to eat. But shifting your window is a really good strategy to make intermittent fasting work for you long term. So what I mean by this is, let's say you normally finish eating at 7. So that's your eating window, let's say, is 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. And you have that Monday or Sunday through Thursday. But then on Fridays, you have dinner reservations, and the dinner reservation isn't even until 7 p.m. So you won't be done until 8 p.m. or maybe later. On those days, what I always recommend to my clients, if you know that you're going to be having a later meal, is just simply shifting your window by that hour or an hour and a half, and starting an hour to an hour and a half later, and then just going back to your normal eating window the next day. This allows for that social component, the really important emotional component with food, where we're still having that cultural aspect of food and being able to enjoy meals with people so that you don't feel isolated and stuck to your schedule. If you feel isolated and stuck to your schedule, it's not going to work for you long term. So it's something that's really important to allow for yourself, not to be too strict with yourself, but allow for that shifting in windows. So the next thing that's really important to remember, focus on meals, not snacking. So remember, the frequency in which you eat will also determine how much of the insulin you're producing. So if you're snacking throughout your eating window, even though you're having a fasting period, if you're snacking throughout your eating window rather than having true meals, that's going to make it so insulin stays higher throughout your eating window, because every time you eat, your body's secreting insulin. Where if you have meals during your eating window, you're allowing your body to naturally dip back down in insulin in between meals. And even during the eating window, you can shift back in and out of using fat as fuel. So not only for a weight loss approach, it's really important, but also for energy levels, and also just making sure that you're not stuck with eating for an 8-hour period and having to think about every hour eating something. This is just a good time saver approach, but it's also much better for our long-term health and wellness goals, and for deep loading, of course. So then this last really important component for having a realistic approach to intermittent fasting: plan on meals that fit your schedule. So what I mean by this is, we all have these lofty, grand ideas of how we want to make this beautiful salad or meal prepped. I don't know, you guys probably seen on Instagram or something, more people will show how they have those 10 meal prepped lunches already for the week. And I don't know how people do that. It would take hours. I know some people love it. That's fine. But we need to also make meals and plan on meals or going out to eat that will not only support your goals, but support your lifestyle. So if you are extremely busy, so I know that especially with real estate, you could be coming in and out of meetings all day or talking with clients or having client meetings where you are going out to eat. It's really important that you actually plan for that so that you aren't stuck with making a last minute decision that won't be supportive of your goals. So like, let's say if you were on a tight schedule in the car often, this is where having a very satiating smoothie might be a better option than a salad. So a salad would take 30 minutes to eat, a smoothie could take 5 to 10 minutes, and you could have it in your car while driving. So this is where planning on meals that can actually be realistic and fit in your schedule will be really important for the longevity piece of intermittent fasting. The other one I put on here, it's actually, again, one of my recipes from my programs, but it's called the Adult Snack Pack. So do you guys remember Lunchables, or like, you know, the whole Lunchable concept of where you peel back the container and there'd be like, I mean, these were unhealthy, but it'd be like the pizza little creations and whatnot. I created a recipe where it's that same concept of how you can have these individualized pieces where you can just eat while you're in a meeting, while you're on the road, but you're getting all the protein, fat, and fiber components that you need. So like hard-boiled eggs paired with sliced cheese or charcuterie type of meat in there, which I personally love and tastes amazing, but is also supportive of goals. And it's all things that you can eat while on the go too. So making sure that you pick meals that are supportive of your schedule and how when you'll be able to eat, or knowing at certain restaurants what types of meals you can be having there. It is completely possible to still be eating within your guidelines, which is actually, again, something I have restaurant guidelines in the programs, while still being on track with your goals. And then focusing on satiating meals, that goes back to the protein, fat, and fiber approach. You need to have, at the very least, the protein and fat component at each of your meals. That's where you will get satiety. Fiber is also a great addition. It's great to get in those vegetables, but if you can only get 2 items in, getting in the protein and getting in the fat is where you're going to get that long-term satiety, get those gaps between meals, and prevent hunger the next day. Okay, will you go to the next one, please? Oh, water. So perfect timing. So one thing that happens when you are fasting, or when you are not secreting as much insulin, rather, not necessarily even the fasting component, but with the lower insulin levels, not only does that increase fat burning, but it also causes your body to not hold on to excess water. So it actually allows your body to release a lot of that excess water, but along with that can be a lot of lost electrolytes. So this is where you might have seen some people talk about they get like headaches or maybe lower energy levels in the beginning while using intermittent fasting. That's because they haven't replaced their water and electrolytes. So one thing that is very common, people might drink a lot of water, be really aware of that. But if you're drinking a lot of water and you're not replacing the electrolytes, you're actually further diluting the electrolytes that you have within your blood. So it's actually making it so you have even less electrolytes than you had before when you drink water, but you don't replace the electrolytes. So with water, a good rule of thumb is minimum half your body weight in ounces. So like if you weigh 140, then you would have a minimum of 70 ounces of water per day. That's really a minimum and a good place to start, because if you're sweating, or if you had a particular sweaty workout, if you use a sauna, like what I mentioned in the beginning, then you will need to be having even more water to replace that. So minimum half your body weight in ounces, but also adding in an electrolyte replacement. There's a variety of ways to do this. If you use a sea salt, which is what I personally recommend, because the vast majority of what you're losing is sodium, and sodium is actually required for having nerve transmissions within the body. That's often why people will feel that headache if they aren't getting enough of the sodium to replace that. So I personally prefer Celtic sea salt. You can get it at Whole Foods. I believe you can get it at Mother's Market if you guys have been there before. One of my favorite grocery stores in South Bay. And then Lazy Acres too, you can get on Amazon. Super prevalent, just a common type of high quality sea salt, where it's a little bit more mineralized than some other salts. I know Himalayan pink salt is very popular with a lot of people. That's also a good option. I tend to recommend Celtic sea salt over Himalayan, just because the reason why it's pink is because it's contaminated with iron oxide. Especially for men, if you have too much iron oxide, that can actually have an increased risk of damage to cells that can cause more heart disease risk. So likely the Himalayan salt that you're using is probably not going to be enough to get that issue, but it's always just a good idea to limit any risk if possible. The other major electrolyte that tends to be lost is magnesium. And if you already have poor sleep habits, or if you don't get high quality sleep, or if you wake up the next day feeling tired, you probably are deficient in magnesium. So magnesium may not be necessary, may be necessary, but for most people, you're not getting enough magnesium, and this can also help improve sleep quality. So for electrolytes, I usually recommend around 1/8 to 1/4 teaspoon in morning water. Might need more depending on how much you've lost. And then magnesium, usually around 250 to 500 milligrams is a good place to start. Okay, and then this last main component, intermittent fasting and exercise. So if you are using intermittent fasting and you start to exercise, or you were used to higher intensity exercise, I would recommend starting off with a lower intensity exercise. Most of the progress you're going to be getting is going to be from your food regardless, but it does take about 1 to 3 weeks to transition from carbohydrate burning to fat burning. So with this, just starting off with walking, light cycling, yoga, light strength training, light swimming, all of those are good options to begin with. Otherwise, the higher intensity exercise can increase hunger, can increase sugar cravings, and that can work against your goals in the beginning when you're just getting used to having a fasting period in the first place. And then this is the last component, I think, of what we're going to be talking about. So using natural appetite suppressants during your fasted state in the morning to begin with is a really good option for beginners. So this is also something I talk about in my programs, but keto coffee, keto matcha latte, using a small amount of heavy whipping cream or coconut oil. This helps to stimulate the satiety hormone CCK without technically breaking the fast. Fat does not stimulate insulin, so you'll still be in that fat burning state, but you'll feel a little bit more satiated. So you're still maintaining that lipolysis, but you're still technically fasting. It's called fasting mimicking instead. And it really helps to reduce hunger, especially when you're a beginner. And so an example day of how this would look like, if you wake up at 6, you'd have your water with Celtic sea salt. You might do a light workout at 6:30 and have your keto coffee at 8 a.m. And then 10 a.m. you would have like your actual break fast, when you're going to actually truly break your fast with a high satiety meal. So like the egg scramble that I have pictured here with the eggs as the main protein source. One of my smoothies, peanut butter and blueberry smoothie. And then you'd have your lunch about 4 hours later. Remember, we're looking to feel satiated for about 3 to 4 hours. And if you're eating a meal like that smoothie or like that scramble, you're going to easily get to that point. Whether it be a lunch that you're getting at a restaurant, like if you're with a client, or something that's fast and easy, like that adult snack pack I mentioned. Those are all great, realistic lunch options. And then 7:30, you would have your last meal. One of my recipes, LA street tacos, or maybe you're ordering in with that protein, fat, and fiber approach. And then you'd start your fast again at 8 p.m. And then we just begin everything all over again. And for all of this, so this expires on Monday, this coming up Monday, for all of the strategies that I discussed and recipes, which is really important, the restaurant guidelines, 8-week meal by meal planning. One thing that's really great in there, the plateau breaker checklist. So if you've had difficulties losing weight, this is one that's really great for you to check out. 3-week workout plan, of course, intermittent fasting strategies and implementation. So I do have 10% off for just you guys, and you can use that code that's listed on there. I have my website down at the bottom as well, just autumnnutrition.com. It does expire on Monday. So if you guys are going to get that, make sure you grab it before the code expires. Okay, next one. I think I just have questions at the end. Yeah, so does anyone have any questions? I know I talk fast. I wanted to get through a lot, but does anyone have questions on anything I went over?
Thanks so much, Autumn. That was awesome. Yeah, if any questions pop up, you guys can feel free to ask or in the chat. And obviously reach out to Autumn for any of that. I think for me personally, there's so much information about fasting and there's so many different ways. I think, having someone like you who will coach people through this process, I think is ideal. So if you were ever thinking about doing fasting, those of you guys on the call or watching the recording, I strongly recommend doing it with a coach, because even in training and the work that I do as well, it's, you could find all these different ways to change your body or do these things, but what you don't want to do is mix them. Is like get a little bit from this person, a little bit from that person, a little bit from that person, because each person has their own area of expertise. And so I would recommend just, going through one process, picking someone, sticking through that process. And that's where you're really going to see the results, because I think we bounce around a lot with these different like theories, and the research is interpreted in so many different ways. So a lot of really great information. Thank you so much, Autumn, for that. Yeah, it was great. So this will be available. The recording will be available, and I will post the follow-ups on the webpage that has all this information about the summit, so you guys can access that stuff. And I'll do that today. So I'll make sure we link that up today, so you have access to this.
Great. And one
Cool.
last note, because I saw that we have quite a few women on here as well, especially I know there's a lot of misinformation on using fasting periods for women and how it's not good for you. That ultimately just comes down to the fact when you pair calorie restriction with intermittent fasting, women are more sensitive to the hunger hormone ghrelin. So, that's where, going back to the satiety components, making sure you have each of those components of your meals helps to actually counter any of those negative effects you have with traditional calorie restriction issues for women and fertility anyway.
Thanks. That's awesome. Great. Well, thanks so much for joining, everybody. We'll see you next week, hopefully.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a great weekend.
All right, bye.